They laughed when she called me too sensitive, in front of the entire team. They said I would never get promoted because I take everything personally. What they did not know was that I was already building a case that would change everything. 1 year later, she sits across from my desk every Monday morning, fidgeting and overexplaining, while I calmly take notes as her new boss. My name is Maya Brooks, and this is the story of how I turned my greatest weakness into my most powerful weapon. I was 35 years old, working in a mid-sized tech company where the air itself seemed to crackle with unspoken tensions and barely concealed hostility. The building was sleek and modern, with its glass walls and open-concept design that was supposed to promote collaboration. Instead, it created a fishbowl where every interaction was scrutinized, every vulnerability exposed. I worked in the engineering department, surrounded by a sea of polo shirts and khakis, where I was one of only 3 women among 27 employees. The numbers alone should have told me everything I needed to know about what I was walking into. But I had been so grateful to land the job that I convinced myself the gender imbalance was just a coincidence. How naive I was. From my first day, I noticed the subtle ways I was made to feel like an outsider. The inside jokes that stopped when I walked into the room. The way my suggestions were ignored in meetings, only to be praised when a male colleague repeated them verbatim 10 minutes later. The casual comments about my appearance, my voice, my reactions to things that should have been unacceptable to anyone with basic human decency. But I was the only one who ever dared to speak up about these uncomfortable realities. When someone made a joke about women being bad at math, I was the one who pointed out how inappropriate it was. When emails were sent with language that was clearly passive-aggressive and designed to undermine, I was the one who called attention to the hostile tone. When team banter crossed the line from playful to cruel, I was the one who suggested we maintain some level of professionalism. They called it just office culture. I called it exhausting. Every single day felt like I was swimming upstream against a current of normalized toxicity. I would wake up in the morning with a knot in my stomach, wondering what fresh hell awaited me at work. Would it be another harmless comment about my emotional state? Another meeting where my input was dismissed without consideration? Another day of feeling like I was slowly disappearing, becoming invisible in my own workplace? But the worst part was not the individual incidents themselves. It was the way they accumulated, day after day, week after week, until I began to question my own sanity. Was I really being too sensitive? Was I imagining the hostility? Was I the problem? That was exactly what they wanted me to think. And then there was Dana. Dana was the queen bee of corporate gaslighting, a woman in her 40s who had somehow climbed the ladder by perfecting the art of making other people feel small. She had this way of speaking that sounded professional and reasonable on the surface, but underneath, every word was carefully chosen to cut and wound. She was the type of person who would smile sweetly while delivering the most devastating critique of your work. She would frame her cruelty as constructive feedback, and her manipulation as team building. She had mastered the art of making you feel grateful for her abuse, as if she was doing you a favor by pointing out all the ways you were failing. Dana had been with the company for 8 years, and she had built a reputation as someone who got things done. What people did not see was how she got things done. By systematically destroying the confidence and morale of anyone who might pose a threat to her position. I became her favorite target. It started small, as these things always do. A comment here and there about my emotional responses to feedback. A subtle eye roll when I shared an idea in a meeting. A way of speaking to me that was just patronizing enough to make me feel stupid, but not obvious enough for anyone else to notice. But Dana was not content with subtle psychological warfare. She needed an audience for her cruelty, and she found the perfect opportunity during our weekly team meeting in March. We were discussing the timeline for a major project, and there had been some confusion about the deliverables. I had been working on a critical component for weeks, and I was concerned that the unrealistic deadline was going to compromise the quality of the final product. I raised my hand and spoke up about my concerns, trying to be diplomatic but honest about the challenges we were facing. I understand we want to move quickly, I said, but I think we need to be realistic about what we can accomplish without sacrificing quality. The current timeline does not account for proper testing, and I am worried we are setting ourselves up for failure. The room fell silent. I could feel the tension in the air, the way people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My manager, Brad, looked annoyed, as if I had just disrupted his carefully laid plans with my inconvenient reality check. And then Dana spoke. "Maya," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "You are always so sensitive about these things. This is why you will never get promoted. You take everything personally instead of just focusing on solutions." The words hit me like a physical blow, not just because of what she said, but because of how she said it. The tone was so condescending, so dismissive, so designed to make me feel like a child who had spoken out of turn. But worse than Dana's words was the reaction from everyone else in the room. They laughed. Not loud, cruel laughter, but those uncomfortable chuckles that people make when they are witnessing something they know is wrong but do not have the courage to speak up about it. The kind of laughter that says better you than me, and thank God I am not the target. Even my manager laughed. Brad actually laughed at his employee being publicly humiliated and having her professional competence questioned. He laughed as if Dana's cruelty was just another form of office entertainment. I sat there, my face burning with shame and anger, feeling like the entire room was spinning around me. I wanted to defend myself, to point out that caring about quality was not the same as being sensitive, to explain that I was not taking anything personally but was simply trying to do my job well. But I could not find the words. I could not find my voice. I just sat there, nodding along as if I agreed with her assessment, as if I was grateful for her feedback, as if I was not dying inside. The meeting continued as if nothing had happened. They moved on to other topics, other discussions, other business. I sat there for the remaining 30 minutes, my mind reeling, my hands shaking under the table, my heart pounding so loud I was sure everyone could hear it. When the meeting finally ended, I walked back to my desk on unsteady legs. I sat down, stared at my computer screen, and tried to process what had just happened. I had been professionally humiliated in front of my entire team, and no one had said a word in my defense. That was when I realized I had two choices. I could let Dana's words define me. I could accept that I was too sensitive, and that my sensitivity was a weakness that would forever hold me back. I could shrink into myself, become smaller and quieter, until I eventually disappeared entirely, or I could do something about it. I chose to fight, but I was not going to fight the way they expected me to fight. I was not going to have a dramatic confrontation or make a scene in the office. I was not going to stoop to their level of petty cruelty and passive-aggressive manipulation. I was going to fight smart. First, I went to HR. I made an appointment with Jessica, the head of human resources, a woman in her 50s who had been with the company for over a decade. I had always assumed that HR was supposed to be on the side of the employees, that they were there to protect people like me from exactly this kind of treatment. I was wrong. Jessica listened to my story with a polite smile, nodding at appropriate intervals, and making sympathetic noises. She took notes on a yellow legal pad, her handwriting neat and professional. When I finished explaining what had happened, she set down her pen and looked at me with what I can only describe as practiced empathy. "I am so sorry you had that experience, Maya," she said. "That must have been very uncomfortable for you." I waited for her to continue, to tell me what steps she was going to take, what investigation she was going to launch, what consequences Dana was going to face for her behavior. Instead, she said, "I think what would be most helpful here is if I had a conversation with Dana about communication styles and team dynamics. Sometimes these things are just a matter of different personalities clashing, and we can work through it with some mediation." Different personalities clashing. As if professional bullying was just a personality quirk that could be smoothed over with a friendly chat. I pressed her for more specifics. What exactly was she going to say to Dana? What was going to prevent this from happening again? What protections were in place for employees who were being systematically undermined by their colleagues? Jessica's smile became more strained. "Maya, I appreciate your passion about this, but I think you might be overthinking the situation. Sometimes the best thing we can do is just move forward and focus on creating positive interactions going forward." Move forward. Focus on positive interactions. The corporate equivalent of boys will be boys. I left that meeting feeling more alone and helpless than I had felt in years. Not only was I being bullied at work, but the people who were supposed to protect me were actively enabling my tormentors. That night, I went home to my small apartment and sat on my couch, staring at the wall. I could feel the familiar spiral of self-doubt beginning to take hold. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this was just how the working world operated, and I needed to develop thicker skin. But then I remembered the look on Dana's face when she had said those words. The satisfaction in her eyes. The way she had savored my humiliation like a fine wine. And I remembered something else. I was not the first person Dana had targeted. Over the years, I had watched her systematically destroy the confidence of other colleagues, particularly women and younger employees. There had been Sarah, the bright young analyst who had transferred to another department after 6 months of Dana's mentorship. There had been Jennifer, the project manager who had eventually quit after Dana had publicly questioned her competence one too many times. I was not the first, and I would not be the last. Unless I did something about it. The next morning, I started documenting everything. I created a detailed spreadsheet with dates, times, witnesses, and exact quotes. I saved every email that contained inappropriate language or passive-aggressive undertones. I noted every instance of being excluded from meetings or having my contributions dismissed. I recorded every microaggression, every subtle put-down, every moment when I was made to feel less than. But I was careful. I did not want anyone to know what I was doing, because I knew that if word got out, I would become an even bigger target. I worked on my documentation at home, on my personal computer, during my own time. At the same time, I began studying organizational culture with the intensity of a graduate student preparing for comprehensive exams. I read books on leadership psychology, emotional intelligence, and conflict management. I took online courses in diversity, equity, and inclusion. I studied the legal framework around workplace harassment and discrimination. I learned about the concept of psychological safety and how it was essential for high-performing teams. I read about the business case for inclusive leadership and the measurable impact of toxic workplace cultures on productivity, retention, and innovation. I discovered that my sensitivity was not a weakness at all. It was a superpower. My ability to notice subtle dynamics, to pick up on emotional undercurrents, to understand how people's behavior affected others. These were not character flaws. They were exactly the skills that organizations needed to create healthy, productive work environments. I was not too sensitive for the workplace. The workplace was not sensitive enough. As I continued my research, I began to understand the bigger picture of what was happening at our company. The high turnover rate, particularly among women and people of color. The low engagement scores on our annual employee satisfaction surveys. The way talented people seemed to leave just as they were hitting their stride. It was not a coincidence. It was a pattern. And patterns could be changed. I spent months building my case, collecting evidence, and developing solutions. I created detailed reports on the current state of our workplace culture, identifying specific problem areas and proposing concrete interventions. I researched best practices from other companies that had successfully transformed their cultures. I developed training programs, policy recommendations, and measurement frameworks. I did all of this while continuing to do my regular job, continuing to endure Dana's subtle cruelty, continuing to smile politely while she chipped away at my confidence week after week. But I was no longer the same person who had sat silently in that meeting, accepting her judgment about my sensitivity. I was building something bigger than my own hurt feelings. I was creating a roadmap for change. The opportunity came in January, almost a year after that devastating team meeting. Our company had been struggling with retention issues, and our latest employee engagement survey had revealed some uncomfortable truths about our workplace culture. The results were so bad that they had gotten the attention of our CEO, Michael Chun, who was known for his focus on data-driven decision-making. In response, Michael announced a new initiative called the Culture and Leadership Revamp, designed to address the systemic issues that were driving talented people away from our organization. As part of this initiative, he was creating a new position, Head of Culture and Ethics. The job description was everything I had been preparing for. The role would be responsible for auditing and restructuring team dynamics, developing and implementing cultural change initiatives, and ensuring that all employees feel valued, respected, and empowered to do their best work. It was as if someone had taken my secret research and turned it into a job posting. I applied immediately. But I was not content to simply submit a resume and hope for the best. I knew that this was my one chance to turn everything around, and I was going to make it count. I prepared for those interviews like my life depended on it. Because in many ways it did. I created a comprehensive presentation that laid out the current state of our workplace culture, complete with data, trends, and specific examples of how our toxic environment was impacting business results. I had charts showing the correlation between our low engagement scores and our high turnover rates. I had graphs demonstrating the financial cost of constantly recruiting and training new employees. But I did not just present problems. I presented solutions. I had a detailed 90-day plan for immediate interventions. I had a 6-month roadmap for systemic change. I had a long-term vision for what our company could become if we committed to creating a truly inclusive, supportive work environment. I had case studies from other organizations that had successfully transformed their cultures. I had research from leading business schools about the competitive advantage of psychologically safe workplaces. I had testimonials from employees at companies that had invested in cultural change initiatives. Most importantly, I had receipts. I had documentation of specific incidents that had occurred in our workplace. I had examples of how our current culture was failing our employees and, by extension, our business. I had evidence of the patterns that were driving people away. I did not name names. I did not point fingers. I simply presented the facts and let the data speak for itself. The interview process was intense. I met with Michael, with the entire leadership team, with representatives from different departments. Each conversation was an opportunity to demonstrate not just my knowledge of organizational psychology, but my understanding of our specific challenges and my vision for addressing them. In one interview, I was asked about my approach to handling resistance to change. I talked about the importance of building coalitions, creating quick wins, and helping people understand how cultural change would benefit them personally. I discussed the need for both top-down leadership and grassroots engagement. In another interview, I was asked about my experience with conflict resolution. I drew on my own experiences being marginalized and dismissed, explaining how I had learned to navigate difficult conversations and find common ground with people who had very different perspectives. In the final interview, Michael asked me directly why I thought I was the right person for this role. I took a deep breath and spoke from the heart. I am the right person for this role because I understand what it feels like to be dismissed and undervalued, I said. I know what it is like to have your contributions ignored and your concerns brushed aside. I know what it is like to feel like you do not belong in your own workplace. I paused, gathering my courage for what I was about to say next. But I also know what it is like to refuse to accept that treatment. I know what it is like to channel your frustration into action, to turn your pain into purpose. I know what it is like to believe that things can be better, even when everyone around you seems content with the status quo. I looked around the room, making eye contact with each person on the interview panel. I am not applying for this role because I think it will be easy. I am applying for this role because I know it will be hard. Because I know that real change requires someone who is willing to ask uncomfortable questions and have difficult conversations. Someone who is willing to challenge the way things have always been done. I smiled, thinking about Dana's words from that team meeting almost a year ago. I have been told that I am too sensitive, that my sensitivity is a weakness. But I have learned that sensitivity is actually a superpower. It is what allows me to notice things that others miss. It is what motivates me to fight for people who cannot fight for themselves. It is what will make me effective in this role. The room was silent for a moment after I finished speaking. I could not read the expressions on their faces, and I wondered if I had been too honest, too vulnerable, too much. Then Michael smiled. Maya, he said, I think you might be exactly what this company needs. 2 weeks later, I got the call. I had gotten the job. The internal announcement went out on a Friday morning, and I will never forget the moment I read it. Please welcome Maya Brooks as our new head of culture and ethics. Maya will be responsible for auditing and restructuring team dynamics, developing cultural change initiatives, and ensuring that all employees feel valued and respected. She will be working closely with leadership to create a workplace where everyone can thrive. I read the announcement 3 times, hardly believing it was real. After years of being told I was too sensitive, too emotional, too much, I was being entrusted with the responsibility of transforming our entire workplace culture. But the real satisfaction came from imagining Dana's reaction when she read that announcement. The first few weeks in my new role were a whirlwind of meetings, assessments, and planning sessions. I was given a budget, a small team, and the authority to make real changes. I was reporting directly to Michael, which meant I had the executive support I needed to implement my vision. One of my first tasks was to restructure the reporting relationships within the organization. As part of this restructuring, I had the authority to determine who would report to whom, based on their roles and responsibilities. When I reviewed the organizational chart, I noticed that Dana's current reporting structure was not aligned with the new cultural initiatives we were implementing. Her role in project management would be much more effective if she reported directly to someone who could provide better oversight and support. Someone like me. I scheduled a meeting with Dana to discuss the new reporting structure. I chose a conference room with large windows and a view of the city, wanting the setting to feel professional and official. When Dana walked into the room, I could see the confusion on her face. She had clearly expected this to be a routine conversation about workflows or procedures. She had no idea what was coming. "Dana," I said, gesturing for her to take a seat across from me, "I wanted to talk to you about some changes we are making to the organizational structure as part of our cultural transformation initiative." She nodded, still looking puzzled. "Effective immediately, you will be reporting directly to me," I continued. "We will be having weekly one-on-one meetings every Monday morning to discuss your projects, your professional development, and your contributions to our team culture." I watched as the reality of the situation sank in. The woman who had publicly humiliated me, who had told me I was too sensitive, who had said I would never get promoted, was now going to be reporting to me. To her credit, Dana tried to maintain her composure, but I could see the shock in her eyes, the way her carefully controlled facade cracked just slightly around the edges. "I see," she said slowly. "And what exactly will these weekly meetings entail?" I smiled, the same polite, professional smile that Jessica from HR had given me all those months ago. "We will be focusing on active accountability," I said. "I know it might feel uncomfortable at first, but I believe it is important for everyone on our team to take ownership of their impact on workplace culture." The irony was not lost on either of us. Our first official one-on-one meeting was scheduled for the following Monday morning. I spent the weekend preparing, reviewing Dana's work history, her interactions with colleagues, and her role in the toxic culture we were working to change. When Monday morning arrived, I was ready. Dana knocked on my office door at exactly 9 o'clock, and I invited her to take a seat. She looked nervous, fidgeting with her notepad and avoiding eye contact. "So," I said, settling into my chair and opening my laptop, "how are you feeling about the new reporting structure?" "Fine," she said quickly. "I am excited to work more closely with you." The words sounded hollow, rehearsed. I could tell she was trying to present herself as enthusiastic and collaborative, but there was an underlying tension in her voice. "That is wonderful to hear," I said. "I want to make sure we get off to a good start, so I thought we could begin by talking about communication styles and team dynamics." I could see her tense up at those words. She knew exactly what I was referring to. "I have been reviewing some of the feedback we have received about team interactions," I continued, "and I think there might be some opportunities for growth in how we communicate with our colleagues." Dana shifted in her seat, her fingers tapping nervously on her notepad. "I am not sure what you mean," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I opened a file on my computer and pulled up some of the documentation I had been collecting over the past year. Not the personal incidents involving me, but the broader pattern of behavior that had been affecting multiple team members. "Let me give you some specific examples," I said, reading from my notes. In the March team meeting, there was an incident where a colleague raised legitimate concerns about project timelines, and the response was to dismiss those concerns by characterizing the person as too sensitive. Dana's face flushed slightly. She knew exactly which incident I was referring to. That was not. She started to say, then stopped herself. I know these conversations can be difficult, I said, my voice calm and professional. But I think it is important for us to examine how our words and actions affect our colleagues. When we dismiss someone's professional concerns by characterizing them as overly emotional, we are not just undermining that individual. We are creating an environment where people feel unsafe to speak up about important issues. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. As leaders in this organization, we have a responsibility to model the kind of communication that fosters trust and collaboration. Does that make sense? Dana nodded reluctantly, but I could see the resistance in her eyes. She was not used to being held accountable for her behavior, and she was not enjoying the experience. I want to work with you to develop some strategies for more effective communication, I continued. I think with some intentional effort, we can create much better outcomes for everyone involved. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, with me providing specific feedback and Dana responding with varying degrees of defensiveness and grudging acknowledgement. By the end of the conversation, she looked exhausted, as if the effort of being held accountable was physically draining. I will see you next Monday, I said as she prepared to leave. And Dana? Let us stay sensitive to tone in all our interactions this week, shall we? The words hung in the air between us, and I could see that she understood the message. I was not going to forget what she had said to me. I was not going to pretend that it had never happened. But I was also not going to let it consume me with bitterness and resentment. Instead, I was going to use it as a teaching moment. Week after week, Dana and I continued our Monday morning meetings. Each conversation was an opportunity to address the toxic behaviors that had been normalized in our workplace for far too long. I gave her feedback on her communication style, her treatment of colleagues, and her contribution to team dynamics. Sometimes she pushed back, trying to minimize her behavior or shift blame to others. But I was prepared for that. I had documentation, examples, and a clear framework for what acceptable behavior looked like. Other times, she seemed genuinely surprised by the impact of her actions, as if she had never considered how her words might affect other people. Those moments gave me hope that real change was possible, even for someone who had been so deeply entrenched in toxic patterns. Gradually, I began to see shifts in her behavior. She was more careful with her words in team meetings. She was more collaborative in her interactions with colleagues. She was less quick to dismiss other people's ideas or concerns. It was not a complete transformation, and it did not happen overnight. But it was progress. More importantly, the changes were not limited to Dana. As word spread about the new culture initiatives, other employees began to feel empowered to speak up about their own experiences. People who had been silently enduring toxic behavior for years suddenly had a safe space to report problems and seek support. I created anonymous feedback systems, regular culture surveys, and open office hours where people could come to me with concerns. I developed training programs on inclusive leadership, unconscious bias, and psychological safety. I worked with managers to help them understand how their behavior affected their teams. The transformation was not just about punishment or consequences. It was about education, support, and creating new systems that would prevent toxic behavior from taking root in the first place. 6 months into my new role, I received an email that made me cry. It was from Sarah, the young analyst who had transferred to another department after enduring months of Dana's mentorship. She had heard about the culture changes that were happening and wanted to share her story. Maya, she wrote, I cannot tell you how grateful I am for what you are doing. When I was working with Dana, I thought I was going crazy. I thought I was the problem. I ended up leaving the team because I could not handle the constant criticism and undermining. But now I understand that it was not about me. It was about a toxic culture that nobody was willing to address. She went on to say that she was considering transferring back to our department, now that she felt confident that things had changed. Thank you for being brave enough to speak up, she concluded. Thank you for turning your pain into purpose. You are making a difference for people like me who did not have the strength to fight back. I read that email 3 times, tears streaming down my face. This was why I had endured all those months of documentation and preparation. This was why I had refused to let Dana's words define me. This was why I had chosen to fight smart instead of giving up. A year after starting my new role, I was asked to present our culture transformation results to the board of directors. The numbers were impressive. Employee engagement scores had increased by 40%, turnover had decreased by 30%, and our company had been recognized as one of the best places to work in our industry. But the statistics that mattered most to me were the personal ones. The number of employees who felt safe to speak up about problems. The number of people who said they felt valued and respected at work. The number of individuals who were thriving in an environment where their sensitivity was seen as a strength rather than a weakness. As I stood in front of the boardroom, presenting the results of our cultural transformation, I thought about that team meeting where Dana had publicly humiliated me. I thought about how small and powerless I had felt in that moment. How convinced I had been that I was the problem. I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. The months of documentation, the countless hours of research, the courage it had taken to apply for a role that seemed impossible to attain. And I thought about Dana, who was now one of my most improved team members, who had learned to check her behavior and consider the impact of her words on others. After my presentation, Michael approached me in the hallway. "Maya," he said, "I have to ask you something. What made you so passionate about this work? What drove you to develop such a comprehensive understanding of organizational culture?" I smiled, thinking about how to answer that question honestly. "Someone once told me that I was too sensitive," I said. "They said it was a weakness that would hold me back. But I realized that sensitivity is not a weakness at all. It is the ability to notice things that others miss. It is the capacity to care about people who are struggling. It is the motivation to fight for change when everyone else is content with the status quo." I paused, looking out the window at the city skyline. I learned that the world does not need fewer sensitive people. The world needs more workplaces that are worthy of our sensitivity. Today, 2 years after that devastating team meeting, I am proud to say that our company has become one of those workplaces. We have created an environment where people feel safe to be themselves, where diverse perspectives are valued, where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. Dana still works for our company, and she still reports to me. But our relationship has evolved into something I never could have imagined. She has become one of my most reliable team members, someone who actively works to promote the kind of inclusive culture we have built together. Last month, she approached me after one of our team meetings. "Maya," she said, "I owe you an apology. Not just for what I said to you that day, but for all the ways I made you feel unwelcome and undervalued. I was wrong about you. I was wrong about what sensitivity means. And I am grateful that you did not give up on me." I accepted her apology, because forgiveness is also part of creating a healthy workplace culture. But I also made it clear that the real measure of her growth would be how she treated the next person who dared to speak up about something uncomfortable. As I write this story, I want to address everyone who has ever been told they are too sensitive for the workplace. Everyone who has been made to feel that their emotional intelligence is a liability rather than an asset. Everyone who has been dismissed, undermined, or marginalized because they dared to notice and name toxic behavior. You are not too sensitive. You are exactly as sensitive as the world needs you to be. Your ability to notice subtle dynamics, to care about people who are hurting, to speak up when something is wrong, these are not character flaws. These are superpowers. Do not let anyone convince you to make yourself smaller to fit into a broken system. Instead, use your sensitivity as a force for change. Document what you observe. Study what you want to see instead. Build the case for the workplace you believe is possible. And remember that sometimes the best revenge is not getting even. Sometimes the best revenge is getting promoted. Your sensitivity is not your weakness. It is your strength. And the world needs more leaders who understand the difference. Please subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of workplace transformation and personal empowerment. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful narratives of resilience and change.